On behalf of Crosscheck Media and Biz Talk Today TV, welcome everyone to Wayve Wire. I'm your host, Todd Schoenberger, and joining me today are Wayve Capital's finest. We have the CEO of Wayve Capital, Joe Besecker, who is traveling today, but he is joining us. And we also have Rhys Williams, the CIO of Wayve Capital. Welcome, gentlemen. Well, today, as you know, we received the jobs report. It's the first clean jobs report we've received in many months now, mainly because of the government shutdown. But Rhys, I want to start with you on this because the headline number came in lower than expected. We had 50,000 new jobs, but we saw the unemployment rate drop. Is this enough evidence, in your opinion, to get the Fed to have an additional rate cut when they meet in a few weeks?
I still think this won't change anybody's mind. So the Fed board members that think that we might have an inflation problem still, and that things are not so weak, and we've already cut quite a bit in the last year, I think they will stay on. I don't think anything will change. So my guess is the status quo. And I do think anecdotally it's much harder to get a job than some of these numbers would indicate, but that may be explaining why only 50,000 jobs were created. Now, how the unemployment rate came down suggests that I guess there's just fewer people looking for work, or you've run out of, there's a lot of immigrants that are getting out of Dodge, and that may be the other reason.
Okay, Joe, what's your take on that? Do you think it is that difficult to find a job, and is it because of AI?
Well, not yet. I don't believe that AI is replacing enough at this stage, but it will come. I think we talked about this last week. I think the jobs are there. I don't think the hiring freeze is over necessarily, but the hiring that is being done, I believe, are at lesser wages. Now, I think people are going to settle, get in the door, and then try to expand from there. Rhys and I have these discussions. He thinks that we're sort of in a recession now, and I would say that in some areas there is a bit of a recession, but we know in other areas there is not. So I think it balances out, and I do think that we will get our 2, maybe 3 rate cuts next year, this year, 2026. Whether it happens the next meeting or not is really not that important to me. But I do believe that, and the challenge with that is that's short-term rates. And what the administration really wants is long-term rates to come down to get real estate moving, get mortgages down, and that type of. So we're still in this, as we've talked about the last several meetings, this transition period, and it's not easy to call. But I think that there wasn't enough bad news in this number to have anybody really worried, but there wasn't enough good news either. So I think we're just in this transition period, and as time goes on, we'll be able to get a little more clarity.
Okay.
I'm not particularly worried in our overall thesis based on anything that came out today.
Okay, so Rhys, let's go back to that, what Joe said. The recession narrative. We have not heard very much about a recession. There's been some whispers here and there. But do you believe that, though? Do you think that the economy is heading south in that direction? If that's the case, wouldn't the Fed be more prudent to actually, they would want to cut even more now? They want to go in more of an aggressive rate cut cycle?
Yeah, I do think that the lower half of the U.S. economy is bad. The Americans under the 50 percentile median income are having issues, but major issues. I do think there's enough spending in the upper half that it's not causing a recession, meaning the high end is really spending, and that's based on good stock market gains, good real estate gains, pretty much certainly over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe not so much last year. And people that are employed are still making, good money. I really think it's the difficulty in the job market is more at the sort of entry level at this point, and not so much that there's mass firings. I'll give you one anecdote, and this is not a high level job, obviously, but Hilton CEO suggested that they have 20% fewer people in sales using AI. They didn't fire anybody, but that's a job
Right.
they're turning over, and instead of replacing people, they're just going to do more with AI. So, that's in 1 year, they brought headcount down by 20%. And that's just one anecdote out of millions. But I think that's going to be ongoing. So I do think there's not going to be this big job surge, because of AI.
So no cutting and no replacing. Then it
No
sounds like.
firing, no firing. They didn't
No.
fire anybody. But as people churn out to get a better job, they didn't replace them.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that we've seen that though. This isn't just an AI story. This has actually been really throughout history. I mean, if you go back to just everything from building cars
Typical
and
cycle.
yeah,
Right.
typical
Yeah,
cycle, right? It's typical technology, and this is what happens. And I know
sure.
we've talked about AI and the impact and positive impact on many industries. We've talked about on other shows. But Joe, going forward though, I know the CES Consumer Electronics Show is going on this week. You have so
Right.
many great things that are coming out. So here we are deep into the 21st century. What do you think, though, from a life sciences standpoint? I know you and I we were talking about potential M&A activity. We had an announcement today
Mm.
from Merck. But going forward, though, this seems to be one of the hotter areas that you have a focus on. Can you tell the audience a little bit about it?
So I typically go to the Consumer Electronics Show. They've changed it up a little bit in Las Vegas, and then go to the JPMorgan Healthcare Conference. The conference last year was really all about uh, having to deal with what was going on um, with the price changes, or what the Trump administration was going to do to prices. So I think they've dealt with that and now can turn their attention more towards typical business. Uh, a lot of these companies have a lot of money that they spend in R&D and brought companies forward, or drugs forward. And now I think they can turn their attention into adding to their pipeline, and that's typically through acquisitions. So I think that this is a year where, with all that's going on in the world today economically, this is a pretty good time for the small and mid cap market, especially the small. And those are the ones that'll be acquired by big companies. So I think there's a good opportunity in the life sciences, not only for growth in these areas, but for acquisition and being acquisition targets.
And this is small cap in the life sciences side, and small caps generally do perform better during rate cutting cycles. Rhys, what about that? I mean, I know you're focused on some of these sectors. What do you think about that life sciences angle?
Well, certainly it got my attention how well life sciences stocks did in the fourth quarter. And I think that's because they were very underloved in general for good reason. I mean, this has been a very tough space. People pick on drug companies as they make a lot of money. And if you look at the stock performance of most, even big pharma companies, it's been, let's call it mediocre at best over the last 20 years. So it's not like drug companies are raking it in as much as popular perception would tell you.
Well,
That
they
being
have to spend so much money, Reese, to get these things. You know, I think it'll be better at this point. But these big drug companies, yes, they're recouping their investment, but a lot of these are coming off patent, and I do believe that there are scores of smaller companies that don't have the distribution, the sales.
sure.
They have good products, and that they will be able to, now that they kind of know the pricing that has been out there, and it's not set, but we kind of know where things are going. I do think there's going to be a lot of acquisitions, and I think with around this big conference at the start of the year, I think you'll see several of these, and I think it'll kind of ignite the fire in that. And I think the regulatory environment is good for it as well. So if I don't typically like to name names, but my old company, Emerald, the two portfolio managers of their Life Sciences ETF, is the way I like to do it. I know these guys. I've trained them. I trained them. They're as good as anybody in the business. So the Emerald Life Sciences ETF is something that I'm going to use as a proxy, and then I'll pepper around that some of the names that I know that I can do that. And I think that's a good way to do it. You know, the world of investing now with ETFs is very interesting, especially active ETFs. And I think people can put into their portfolios things that are, instead of having to do the work on each one of these, you get expertise, you hire that expertise, and then you can selectively pick names or two when you want to juice the performance.
No,
Although
I don't
the
disagree.
Emerald ETF last year, by the way, was up something like 58%. So they were the number two. And yeah, they're my old guys and I love them. And I love all the people at Emerald and I do own it. So I just want to let you know that this is something that I own. I own most of the Emerald funds, but this is I think as you're looking at sector specific and you're looking for expertise, they do an exceptional job.
And I'm not saying I'm disagreeing with you. I think the fourth quarter rally is giving people some currency. I think the problem with M&A before is everybody's going down for basically 5 years.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to pull the trigger because it's hard to find out where the bottom is. I think there's some sense among life science companies that there is a bottom out there, and so therefore,
I'm calling the bottom.
yeah.
Whether
Well,
I'm right or
obviously the
not,
bottom was
whether I'm
last.
right or not, whether right or not, I don't know, but I'm calling the bottom.
The bottom was last year, obviously, because obviously it was a good year last year. But I do think that gives people a little more courage when you have stock prices going up.
Okay. Well, Rhys, we just heard what Joe is owning, and I know one position that Wayve Capital has is in this company called Serve Robotics. Can you tell the audience a little bit about this? Because this is one company that looks like it's poised for a big breakout in 2026.
Yeah, well, we're not going to make a prediction about whether anybody should buy it, but we do find this company very interesting. And here, this is a spin out of Uber Eats, actually. And the reason why they spun out was so they could actually get contracts with other people like DoorDash and Instacart. And they're the largest delivery robot company out there. They have 2,000 robots, which makes them, by the way, number two behind Waymo in terms of autonomous vehicles out there right now. And that's up from probably 150 at the beginning of last year. So very rapid growth. And so what's the exciting thing about that? It costs $1 to get a delivery with a robot versus $10 with a human. And a human expects to be tipped. You have to tip the robot. So it's a nice experience both for the restaurant as well as for the individual that's the customer for both those reasons. So we think there's pretty much limitless demand over time. And the caveats are this is not a profitable company. It's a rapid revenue growth company, but they're not going to have earnings this year. They're not going to have earnings next year. They're plowing everything back into growth. So, I would put this in the speculative category. But the reason why it's done so well this week is because Jensen Huang highlighted it as one of the, a quote unquote great company. So that's the reason it's done well. Not because.
So how does it work then? If I buy something from a restaurant and I want it delivered, are robots actually delivering it?
Yes, in big cities, it's starting. It's early days. Obviously, they're the largest, and they have 2,000 robots in the whole country.
So what's it, a drone or
they're in California? No, it looks like a little Star Wars robot. It's coming along it's about 2 feet high, 3 feet high, and it goes along the sidewalks. Totally. I've seen them in Miami. They're big in Miami, and it's very cool because it can go really fast. And then even though there's a lot of pedestrians in Miami, right? So if it feels there's a pedestrian or a garbage can coming up, they put on the brakes and kind of move to the left. It's really cool to watch.
I think in general, Rhys, I think you're right. The Consumer Electronics Show this year, which I obviously wasn't able to attend, but I have gotten reports from everybody there. Robotics is probably the number one theme, and we are at that inflection point where you're going from conceptual to actual, now 2,000 in a whole country like this isn't a lot, but these pilots that are doing are starting to do well. They're learning from them. So I believe over the next 5 years, robotics and it's no longer just for manufacturing or whatever. There's all kinds of stuff. So I kind of agree with your theory on robotics. So.
Yeah. No,
And
well,
by the way, and we're here in Pennsylvania, probably one of the preeminent robotics purveyors is Carnegie Mellon University, as other universities in Pennsylvania. But Carnegie Mellon is on the cutting edge of all that. And so, I think that our ability to visit these companies, see what's going on. Actually, we meet with universities, see what's in the pipeline. The one problem when you go to a consumer electronics show is these guys are actually selling. So they sometimes hype it up a little bit, but in general, the theme of robotics is very big, very strong, and the technology behind it, like you said, Jensen, it's all going to be powered by the semiconductors, which you've been following very closely, and actually went overseas to check them out, Rhys. I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon.
Rhys, I'm trying to get an understanding here and also paint the picture for the audience for this robot. Does the restaurant own the robot, or is it powered by an outside vendor?
no. Serve Robotics owns owns the robot, and then
Okay.
they have contracts with Uber Eats, with DoorDash, with Instacart to serve certain restaurants. Not they're bringing on the restaurants because there's a bit of an education effort to have the people interact with the robots, but it's pretty simple. And so you order from there's a restaurant in Miami called Mr. O's, and they have these delivery robots from actually Serve Robotics, and so they put the pizza into the robot, and then they program the robot to go to whatever the address is,
Okay.
and they try to multi-batch. So in other words, if you can, it's really cost effective if you have 2 or 3 deliveries, and they can put, I think, up to 6 or 7 different deliveries into one, and then they come back.
And here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we have a restaurant called Pancake Farm that has a robot that helps the servers deliver the food. So they program them to the table, they get out of the way, and that type of thing is going to help the restaurants reduce their costs. Same thing. They don't buy the robot, they license with the robot people, and that's going to help service times. It goes right from the kitchen to the table. Now the server comes and puts it on the table once the food is there, but it also saves on their arms, their elbows, their shoulders. So all of this is trending that way, and even in Little Lancaster, PA, robotics is starting to hit.
Okay. Let's switch gears here for the final topic of the show. Rhys, the geopolitical events over the weekend since our last show last Friday, but obviously quite a bit of news was taking place in Venezuela. Are you right now, what is your opinion on the oil industry right now? Are you thinking that this might be a great time to buy, or would you just rather wait and see how everything plays out?
Well, I guess I'm more in the latter camp because there's a lot of cross currents, right? I mean, the Maduro raid was obviously very spectacular and something out of a science fiction movie. I'm sure there'll be a great Hollywood movie about it. But you still haven't changed the government, and so it's unclear to me whether they're really going to take orders from Trump or not. And I just think there's a lot of uncertainty. I also think that the oil price is not very high right now.
Right.
So I just don't see, even if you can get more Venezuelan oil out, below $50, nobody in the shale industry is going to drill in the U.S. And the U.S. has been the incremental capacity in the world. So I don't see any scenario that the oil price can go below 50 and stay there. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
But I think this may, keep it in a sort of a range. And we prefer natural gas to oil because that is something that is already very cheap, and it's in the U.S. and it's a big, that's what's powering a lot of this data center expansion is going to be natural gas led fuel cells. There was a big article today about some Meta signing up a couple of nuclear power plants, but you look at when they're actually going to come on, it's like 2034. So if the data centers are going to expand, you're going to need gas for the next 5 years.
Okay. Joe, have you started putting a storage facility in your backyard?
No, but not too far from where I live, with much controversy. They're talking about data centers at some old buildings or wherever, and It's a little bit like in the old days with nuclear, not in my backyard. They're worried about the power and the water and whatever. And the regulatory, especially with nuclear, is still hard to deal with. But I think all of these things are trending that way. I wouldn't want to get too far in front of it, but on the other hand, you don't want to be Johnny come lately. And I think, as I said, I think all of this is boding well again for small cap, because I think a lot of the mid and large cap people will go downstream and start to fill in and vertically integrate their companies. And they're going to need some of these smaller fill-in companies to do that. So once again, I think that this is a really good time to be looking and adding to your portfolio some type of small cap exposure, because I think we're in that stage now, and they've underperformed for 6 years. This is probably one of the longest periods of times where the small caps have done that. And if it were me, I would be more interested in small cap as opposed to small and mid cap, because when the differentiation comes, small cap grows a lot faster. Right now, most of the return in small cap has been financials, the regional banks, the smaller banks, but I think that'll start to broaden out. So if I were a asset allocator, I would really be snooping around at small cap and small cap managers as an allocation.
Okay, well, being bullish on small caps sounds like a great plan. Gentlemen, what a wonderful show once again. I know we're going to be meeting again
I
next
got
Friday.
it, Todd. I got to stop you. Your Commodores or whatever they are, Commanders, they're sitting at home. But my Eagles,
my Ravens,
I'll be there. Your Ravens, I don't understand what they did with that great that great coach.
Yeah.
It is what it is. But I'm very excited about my Eagles this Sunday, and let's see if we can start a road to getting there again. San Francisco is going to be tough, but I think we'll handle them.
But Eagles are favorite right now, so that's a good sign. So we'll see how it does play out. And I know we'll talk more about that next Friday. We're also going to start talking about the Supreme Court ruling on tariffs. I predict we'll get a ruling next Friday because it leads up into the 3-day weekend, and that announcement will probably come after the market close. But let's see if my prediction comes true. But gentlemen, okay, I got to thank you for joining me today on your show for Wayve Wire for Wayve Capital, Joe Besecker and Rhys Williams. And I'm Todd Schoenberger. Thank you once again for joining us today, and we'll catch you next Friday at 12 o'clock live. Take care.
Go Birds, go Birds.
Access real-time data and intelligent analytics exactly when you need them. Get the right data at the right time. Learn more at quotemedia.com.